or we're trying to figure out maybe a new product to come out with, and so we brainstorm all the time about new products and new ways of distilling, new recipes. We look at all aspects in our experimental program where we look at, in the environment, we look at wood and barrels and aging, but with the experimental collection, it's a unique way for us to release to the public, some of the experiments that we've worked on over the years. We started experimenting really heavily in 1994. That was really our first, experiment into trying something outside the norm. And, we started in 2006 with our first release because we were making all these great different products and different barrels in the warehouse, but we didn't really have a way to show them to the public. And so in 2006, we started the experimental collection. And, what we did is we released them in these 375 bottles. We tried to explain on the label everything about the experiment. And we tried to, show the consumer, what are we doing and what we're trying to achieve, and some tasting notes. And, we've tried to release, at one time we got all the way up to about 30,000 barrels of different experiments in our warehouse. And some of the changes over the recent years is the fact that some of these experimental whiskeys have made it, and we call it graduated into full-time releases now. So for example, 4-grain was an experiment for us. We experimented with wheat and rye and corn and barley, and we put those together and made a bourbon whiskey. We aged it up and released it, and we got a lot of great feedback. So, and actually won the world's best whiskey. So we release that now on a full-time basis under the E.H. Taylor label, in honor of the innovation for E.H. Taylor, and we're going to continue to do that. So that is an example of an experimental bourbon that we've been working on that we've graduated to full-time. And so now instead of 30,000 barrels, we converted a lot of those barrels over to, full-time products. So we're down to about 7,000 or 8,000 barrels of experiments now. But so we still have quite a few, in inventory, and we're making more every year, depending on, again, what we're trying to learn, what we're trying to explore. And we look at every aspect. So if it's grains, if it's distillation technique, fermentation, of course the aging process, which is a lot of variation you can do there with woods and different locations and warehouses, and so we're just having some fun and trying different things. Sometimes we do it and we're really happy with the results. A lot of these experimental collections that we've released, and we'll talk about 4 today, but a lot of these have been really excellent whiskeys. Sometimes they're different, so you have to have an open mind when you're tasting these. It's not going to be maybe sometimes it's not a traditional. This one here is, we'll talk about in a minute, but it's with oats, for example. We don't put oats in our bourbons traditionally. So you got to kind of have an open mind about what you're tasting, and, not always a real hard and fast traditional bourbon whiskey. It might have some different unique character to it. Mm-hmm. And we're just trying to, hit on, we believe the very best bourbon has not been produced. And so we're just trying to look and, see if we can improve. And some of it is also, we're trying to make our legacy brands more consistent. So with all of our experiments, we're trying to learn, why does the whiskey taste the way it does? What can we do differently, or at least explain the reasons why this whiskey tastes the way it does. And that's what we do with the experimental program.
Yeah, that's great. And I know like you said, there's a lot of barrels out there with different interesting experiments. We've got a lot of people chiming in already, Harlen. We've got people from Seattle, Baton Rouge, Texas, Cincinnati, Germany. So a lot of people tuning in. And we've got a good question here from Scott on Buffalo Trace Distillery. What What percentage of these experiments eventually become a commercially sold product? Is it a big percentage of these that make it to market? Is it a small percentage?
Well, and like I was just talking about, out of 30,000 barrels, probably 22,000 of those were turned into full-time products. So we were able to convert a lot of that bourbon, whiskey, depending on what the experiment was, into full-time. So the ratio is pretty high. I mean, we've actually had some whiskeys that did not turn out very good, and we called them failed experiments.
Mm-hmm.
And we've
Where
had
are those?
And
Where are they?
Well, we've had a few. So when we taste them and we call them failed, now I say they are failed because they don't taste good. Mm. So, however, we did learn something from the experiment. So it depends on what how do you define failed. But we actually put those experiments in bottles. And across the face, we said failed experiment. And we saved them. We didn't, we're not selling them, but we saved them because we want to show people when they come in what a bad whiskey tastes like. How do you know what bad whiskey tastes like unless you explain it? We've tried some really over-the-top charring, for example, and it was just so charred and so heavily smoked that we felt like it was wasn't going to be a really good whiskey out on the market. And then we had a few people taste it, and they said, "Oh, that's the greatest thing I ever tasted." So it does depend on the person, but that's one example where we said, it was a failed experiment.
Mm. Yeah, Eric looks like Buffalo Trace Bourbon on Facebook says failed equals chance to learn.
That's exactly right,
yeah.
And that's the way I view that. We learned every one of those. We learned a little bit of something about how to be more consistent or avoid things. How to define what a sour whiskey tastes like, or mustiness, or whatever we're trying to learn. So it was valuable to us.
Is that something that you ever dip back into? Do you ever go back to those and just remind yourself, or is that something that you've already learned and know it?
Well, we try to remember it, but yeah, that's a good thing about having the samples is we can go back and do that.
Yeah.
And we have. That's how we do all of our products. We have some standards set aside for even the experiment. So we have some standards there. And when we repeat an experiment, which we've done, we can go back to the original and taste and understand what we were trying to get accomplished. But
mm-hmm. Ty Alderman on Facebook, and it's Buffalo Trace Bourbon Facebook page, says, what is his least favorite tasting experiment? Was there one that sticks out that just was like, oh?
Well, that sour whiskey was pretty bad. We actually soured the, we wanted to understand what it would take to sour the wood of the barrel before you put the whiskey in, and would the whiskey change that souring of the wood, and it didn't. It was just really bad. That was probably the one that sticks in my mind, but we've had a few.
I guess you also learn your limits too. When a batch is changing or a barrel looks a certain way,
absolutely, and
now you're like, okay, this is probably okay because we've done an experiment with it at this point and it was fine.
Yeah, for example, the charring experiment, we char all of our barrels to a number 4 char, and one would think, well, number 4 is good, number 5 must be better. So we took it to the extreme and we called it a number 7. I don't even know if that exists. But we charred that barrel to the point where it was about to fail. I mean, it was about to fall apart. And we put the whiskey in there, and it tasted like a campfire. Just a real deep, harsh, campfire. And again, some people like that, but we didn't think that was ready for market.
Mm. And is there and these aren't just sitting in there for a week or two. These are long term, or is it all over the place as far as time?
Yeah, time is the key component on all this aging, and that's one of the things that we talk about all the time is when we pull an experiment after 10 years, we say, okay, we like this at 10 years, it's really good, we think it's well-rounded, got a lot to offer, but I wonder if 12-year-old would be really good too, or maybe even better. So sometimes we're known to save a few barrels. So we'll take, if you've got 40 barrels of 10-year-old or 12-year-old, you pull out 32 of them and leave 8 and see how those 8, age up, because, sometimes it gets even better when it ages up. And there is a limit. You'll know it when you taste that barrel and it's just over oaked and over, real tannic and, overly dry. And that's when you know you've went too far. Same way with finishing barrels. We've done a lot of finishing with our 1792 expressions, and same way with those. When you're finishing, the bourbons, you got to really watch how long you finish those in those barrels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we've got just tons of questions flying in. If you want to get started there, I'll start to.
Yeah.
Well, one, Eric Ross says, will there be any more experiments using amaranth? That was one, and that landed in the E.H. Taylor line as well.
Yeah, we were really happy with that amaranth experiment, and that was a good example. We get ideas from everywhere, and that amaranth experiment came from a bartender in San Francisco. I was sitting at the bar that day, and they said, "Have you ever made bourbon out of amaranth?" And I said, it hasn't been on the list yet. So, one of the things we do is we have a committee, and we get ideas from all over the world, really. And we have about 30 people on our experimental team, and the team brings in ideas. It doesn't have to be always bourbon. It can be, tequila ideas, vodka ideas, gins and different things. But we bring all these ideas in, and then we prioritize those ideas, based on what we think we can learn and, the feasibility of the project and so on. And then we get all those ideas and prioritize them and pick the ones that, we think we can do first. And you can't do them all because, and I've often said we've got a lifetime supply of ideas, but, you only got so many, years to get them done. Mm-hmm. So, but we're working through the list, and we've got a lot of, sometimes people come up with new ideas that float to the top. It's just a better idea than the ones below. So it doesn't necessarily mean your idea will never get there, but we've got a really good, bright bunch that are really working hard every day to come up with, like I said, new products and new ideas and experiments. So we look forward to that we do that twice a year, and we look forward to that.
Has the batch size changed over the years? Because I was thinking, back then you lay down a few barrels, and today it's the most amazing whiskey you've tasted. Yeah. There's only a few barrels. Have you increased it or decreased it?
We did increase our batch sizes. Now the minimum experiment for us is about 6 barrels. Used to be 1 barrel. We've raised it up minimum of 6. Usually we do 10 or 12 as the smallest size. And of course we can go as big as we want. We can go from really 1 barrel at a time all the way up to thousands of barrels. It just depends on the experiment. And we do try to, for the E.H. Taylor expressions, we want enough barrels there to be able to supply that label. So those will be a lot more barrels in those experiments. Mm. So.
Patrick McCure does ask, are these available to the public? So I just want to clear that up, that these, every year there's releases of different experiments, right?
Yeah, we release them. Again, sometimes there's only 10 barrels of an experiment, so that's 10 barrels for the whole world. So they'll be very allocated and hard to find, but you can find them, and they're out there, and sometimes they're in bars, and you can taste them, and it's just a fun way to taste new things and new whiskeys that are out there with different ingredients. This first one here is interesting. It was one that, we're a certified organic producer of whiskeys and bourbons at this distillery. So we made an organic 6-grain, and we were real happy with it. We had corn, buckwheat, brown rice, sorghum, wheat, and rye.
Wow. It's like a cocktail.
It is a cocktail. And, I remember this was in 2010, but I remember when we came up with this, recipe, we said, really what the purpose of this experiment is to see if the complexity would be there with 6 grains. And sure enough, when you taste this whiskey, that's the first thing that hits your mind is you can almost taste each one of those grains, and the complexity, it kind of blows your mind a little bit. But it's there, and it really, really showed through, and really good, complex bourbon, I thought.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So that one is the fun.
Yeah, that's a great one.
2010.
And I'm looking on the website. You can go to Buffalo Trace Distillery website. There's greatbourbon.com/experiments. Get you to these as well. I'm looking at the 2020 release. So we did release one this year, and it was release number 23. So you've done about 23 of these now.
23 releases.
Releases.
Yeah, we're putting away probably about, I don't know, 10 or 15 experiments a year. And some of them are real small, some of them are bigger. And we're just trying to, it depends on the age when we release them, but there's always something in the hopper. We've always got something coming of age, and that's the fun part about it. You can kind of look back on all your notes when you did these experiments, and really, it's fun to see how they turn out sometimes.
Yeah, what's the next one?
This second one is it was one of our earlier ones. We released this, and I think it was in 07 or 08, made with oats, and it was just we took out the rye and we put in oats. We did one with rice as well, but it was the experiment. The purpose of that experiment, would you taste that oat character, in the distillate, and it showed through. And so just like the rye, just like you would expect, it really, to me, was one of the first experiments we did where we could substitute a grain, an ingredient, and really drive the flavor profile, just like you do with rye, with our traditional rye bourbons. And it really, again, you learn something about a new product, but you learn something about our legacy brands and how important that rye is in that legacy brand, and how important those percentages are, as it's, producing that whiskey.
Yeah, so right off the bat, you're going to miss that rye. You miss it in the flavor, the taste. Is there one that surprised you? Jason Cook asked, which one surprised you the most?
Well, again, I try to keep an open mind on all these experiments. We did one where we were looking at different ways of smoking and basically treating the barley, the malted barley, before you made the whiskey. And we haven't released this one yet, but it's an aged product that to me is one of the better ones that we have, and really tasty. It's one of the better whiskeys, and it doesn't taste like a traditional bourbon, but it is, once you understand what it's made out of, you understand it. But the flavor's really good. It was a really pleasant surprise. We got another one that we recently dumped that's in the tank and waiting for bottling that we're really excited about. It's a really good whiskey, and I can't tell you much about it.
I was going to say,
but,
come on.
The internet probably has it, but anyway.
Well, I know, these are really great whiskeys to challenge your palate and really sort of just challenge what you think whiskey is. And that's why I enjoy them so much, is that we all have our favorite go-tos on a daily, but to be able to taste some completely different experiments and different whiskeys is pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. And then, it explains things. So when you taste one with oats, you're thinking, okay, now I missed the rye. What does that oats taste like? And, it just explains why whiskey tastes the way it does. This one here is one that we really started experimenting right off the bat with barrels, because, you can get the whiskey and then you can do a lot of different things with wood. And, we experiment with how you char the inside of the barrels, how many times do you expose it to a new barrel? And that's what this one is double barreled, twice, in a new barrel. And, you would expect it to create more flavor because you're getting into a new barrel twice, and that's exactly what it delivered. So then the question is, how long do you age it, right? So the complexity of, is it 4 years in a new barrel and then 3 more in a new barrel, or is it 5 and 2?
Unlimited.
So it's unlimited, and you just have to kind of split the baby and do one younger and one older, and you can draw conclusions in between.
Mm-hmm.
But this turned out to be a really good one. Very dark and rich and a lot of flavor.
And I noticed, we'll have some questions about, twice barreled or different ingredients that those aren't considered bourbons. I mean, it does say whiskey on there, so, that's something to keep in mind for anybody that's asking that question, is this bourbon? But it's actually experimental whiskeys.
Yeah, sometimes they're bourbons.
Right.
You know, the 6 grain was actually a bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
It had the majority corn, the rest grain. But some of these have to be a whiskey because it depends on how you're, handling the, different whiskeys. If you're finishing it in something or whatever.
Mark Fishwicks asks, are all or any of the experimental products single barrels? Are these sometimes batched, or are they dumped in single barrels, or does that matter? That's part of the experiment, maybe.
Yeah, sometimes they are single barrels. We've done, like I said, some experiments, just one barrel. I can think of several off the top of my head, but when we first put in our micro distillation operation, we wanted to see how small of a batch we could make, and we were making 1 barrel batches. And what we were trying to do is tweak that distillate in order to match our current operation, and that way it gives us basically a pilot operation, and we're able to do that, and it gives us the ability to try new things and understand what it would taste like when you run it on the full-time operation.
Mm.
But this last one here is one that was fun because not many people realize, but when you're making barrels, you have to treat that wood like you would a steak. You want that wood to be just right when you char it inside the wood in order for your recipe to taste the best. And if you age that wood, out in the yard, it starts to degrade over time. It starts to, basically oxidize that wood.
And this is before it's a barrel.
It's a barrel.
It's staves at this point.
That's right.
Out in the stave yard.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and those staves are breaking down the lignins in that wood, and over time, you have to pick what time that you want to char that barrel before you add the whiskey. And what we did is an experiment where we did 6 months of aging, 12 months, 24, and 36. This is the 36-month seasoned staves before we charred them. It just showed us the difference. You created different whiskeys by aging that wood differently. And we were most happy with the 12. We really liked the 36-month, but the problem was the logistics of aging that wood for 3 years before you make a barrel is not really practical. So we do some of that, but we were really happy with also the 12-month-old. So we basically set a minimum age between 6 and 12 months before we make barrels. So we do that so that's an example of something that we learned from the experiment, and then we implemented it into all of our full-time products. So all of our barrels have a minimum stave age before we char it and create these whiskeys.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about barrels and trees and different regions and locations before on past episodes of Whiskey Wednesday, and it is fascinating how much character and flavor the wood adds to the whiskey.
Oh, yeah.
It's a big percentage.
Yeah, and people ask me, what do you think percentage-wise the wood adds? And I always say it's about 50%. So you can make, different distillates, you can make all these different things, but that wood is the most important thing to contribute to the whiskey character and flavor, because if you put it away at upper floors, it's extracting more out of that wood. How deep was the char? Where was the wood harvested from? A lot of different things that we're looking at that we know create different character in that whiskey.
Yeah, so I mean, when we talk about recipes, we probably don't mention the barrel enough in the recipe. Probably
not, but it's the biggest component of especially for bourbon whiskey, obviously, because it's all has to be a brand new charred oak barrel, and you're getting that wood. If it's the bottom half of the tree, it's getting the most nutrients and the most flavor, and that's when you get that and you cut it up into staves, and then you age that wood for a certain length of time. Then how do you char that wood? How deep do you make that char? And how long does the whiskey stay in that barrel? Those things are really important to making really good bourbons.
Yeah. I think, we've got a lot of excitement for some of these new ones you've been hinting towards. But I think it'd be great, like if you see any of these at a bar, a local bar, to try to sample some and try them out. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say sometimes you get to some of the bars, they'll have these up at the very top shelf, and they're just fun to pull them down and read the labels and get a little sip and compare them to what you normally drink, and you might learn a little something.
Yeah. So, question for me really is like in the beginning, when did you realize it was necessary to experiment? Like, was it right off the bat when you joined, like, hey, we need to try some new things here, or maybe walk us through the very beginning of this process?
Yeah, well, I was really lucky when I walked in 1995. There was a guy named Ronnie Edens, and he was working in our warehouse. And at the time, he was there probably 35 years. Been there a lot of experience. And that guy was trying already. He was trying some different woods and different ideas with the barrels. And really, I just caught on. And what we said was, that's a great idea, because we do believe the best whiskey has never been made yet, and there's always room for improvement. And we just wanted to we wanted to become better distillers. We wanted to understand why the whiskey tastes the way it does. How do you make better whiskey? How do you run consistent products? That word consistency is a big deal for us. And there's no way to do that other than learn and research, and just like any operation, that's how NASCAR builds better tires, by putting it on the tracks and trying different tires. So that's the way that works, and same way with whiskeys.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's so, I think what I learned listening to you about this is actually how difficult it is to put out consistent whiskey. There's a lot of variables, and there's a lot of things. So I guess once you learn the inconsistencies, it allows you to, really dial in the consistency too.
Yeah.
Again, lots of questions. We're about out of time with you, and I know we could talk about this for a while. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think, for us, it's a fun part of the job. We're able to explore and, try, possibly develop new products, and it gives us a way for the public to taste some of our experiments, and we're really happy to be able to do it, and hopefully you get to try some.
Yeah, no, that's great. And again, we've got a lot of shout outs from different parts of the world here. So yeah, thanks for watching, and thanks, Harlen. I appreciate the time as always.